The flight from Dubai to London was supposed to be peaceful. The cabin lights were soft, the seats were wide and comfortable, and most of the passengers had already settled into their own quiet worlds. Some were watching movies. Some were reading. A few were already asleep under warm blankets. It was a kind of flight where people expected silence and privacy. In the first-class section, a well-known Arab millionaire sat beside his wife, holding their 6-month-old baby. He was a man used to control. In business meetings, his voice carried weight. In public, people stepped aside when he walked past. He was calm, confident, and rarely caught off guard. But tonight, none of that mattered. About 20 minutes after takeoff, just as the seatbelt signs turned off and the engine settled into a steady hum, the baby began to cry. At first, it was soft, a small whimper, the kind of sound that most people ignore. His wife gently adjusted the baby's blanket and whispered something soothing. He reached over and touched the baby's tiny hand. They both smiled nervously, hoping it would pass. It didn't. The crying grew louder. Within a minute, the baby's face turned red. The small whimpers turned into sharp, desperate screams that echoed through the cabin. Conversation stopped. A few heads turned. Someone removed their headphones. The millionaire straightened in his seat. He cleared his throat, trying to stay calm. His wife tried rocking the baby gently. She checked the bottle. She checked the diaper. Everything seemed fine, but the crying only became stronger. A flight attendant approached with a polite smile. She asked if they needed anything. Warm water? A fresh bottle? A small pillow? They accepted the help, grateful but embarrassed. The crying continued. 10 minutes passed. The sound began to change the mood of the cabin. A businessman across the aisle sighed loudly and adjusted his jacket. A woman near the window pressed her lips together in frustration. Someone further back whispered, "This is going to be a long flight." The millionaire heard it all. He was not a man who worried about what people thought of him, but this was different. This was his child, his responsibility, and he could do nothing to stop the cries. He stood up carefully and tried walking slowly down the aisle, gently bouncing the baby in his arms. For a brief moment, the crying softened. He felt hope. But as soon as he sat down again, the screams returned, louder than before. His wife's eyes began to fill with tears. She had not slept properly in days. Traveling with an infant was already difficult. Doing it in front of strangers who were clearly annoyed made it worse. "I don't understand," she whispered softly. He was fine before boarding. The millionaire nodded, but he had no answer. Another 15 minutes passed. Now the entire first-class section was fully aware of the situation. Some passengers tried to be patient. Others were no longer hiding their irritation. One older man even pressed the call button and asked if there was anything that could be done about the noise. The word stung. The flight attendants remained professional. They offered apologies to nearby passengers while continuing to help the family. They suggested adjusting the cabin temperature slightly. They brought a small toy from the onboard children's kit. Nothing worked. The baby cried as if something was deeply wrong. Meanwhile, a few rows behind the first-class curtain, in the business section, sat a single father and his young daughter. Their seats were not as large or luxurious, but they were comfortable enough. The father looked tired, his shirt slightly wrinkled, his eyes heavy from long work days. He had saved for months to afford this trip. His daughter, around 8 years old, sat by the window. She had been excited about flying. She had pressed her face against the glass before takeoff, watching the runway lights blur beneath them. But now, her attention was completely fixed on the crying. Unlike the others, she did not look annoyed. She listened carefully. She tilted her head slightly, as if trying to understand something hidden inside the sound. Her father noticed her staring toward the front. "It's okay," he whispered gently. "Babies cry sometimes." She nodded, but her eyes stayed focused. The crying continued for almost 40 minutes. At this point, even passengers in the back could hear it clearly. The sound cut through the steady engine noise. It was sharp, emotional, impossible to ignore. The millionaire felt his confidence slipping. He was used to solving problems with quick decisions. If a deal went wrong, he fixed it. If someone needed help, he provided it. Money had always given him options, but money could not calm his child. He looked around and saw the quiet frustration on the faces near him. He felt something he rarely felt: helplessness. His wife tried feeding the baby again. The baby pushed the bottle away and cried harder. A younger flight attendant leaned closer and asked softly if the baby might be uncomfortable because of cabin pressure. She suggested, gently rubbing behind the ears. They tried that too. Nothing changed. The baby's tiny hands were clenched into fists. Tears rolled down soft cheeks. The sound was filled with fear, not just discomfort. The millionaire's jaw tightened. He felt the pressure building inside him. Not anger at anyone, but frustration at himself. He wished he could trade places with the child. He wished he could understand what was wrong. Back in business class, the little girl slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. Her father noticed immediately. "Stay seated," he said quietly. "I just want to see," she replied. He hesitated, then nodded once, allowing her to stand near their seats but not move further. She leaned slightly into the aisle, trying to look past the curtain that separated the sections. The crying filled the space again. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. A woman pulled a pillow over her ear. A man turned his movie volume higher. Time seemed slower. After nearly an hour, the situation had not improved. The baby showed no signs of calming down. The millionaire looked exhausted now. His wife's makeup had smudged slightly from wiping her tears. The polished image they carried when boarding the plane was gone. They were simply parents, worried and overwhelmed. The captain made a routine announcement about flight time and weather conditions. His calm voice contrasted sharply with the crying that continued underneath it. The little girl in business class stepped closer to her father. "Papa," she whispered. He looked down at her. "I think the baby is scared." He gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe." She shook her head gently. "Not just crying. Scared." He didn't respond right away. There was something serious in her voice. Something thoughtful. She listened again, closing her eyes for a moment. Up front, the millionaire sat back down, holding his head briefly in his hands while his wife rocked the baby once more. He felt every stare, every sigh. He was no longer the powerful man people admired. He was just a father who could not comfort his own child. The little girl opened her eyes. Her expression changed. It was no longer simple curiosity. It was decision. She looked at her father again, her small hands gripping the armrest tightly. "I want to help," she said softly. He blinked, surprised. "Help how?" She did not answer right away. She was still listening, as if the sound itself was giving her instructions. The crying echoed again through the cabin. Several passengers exchanged tired looks. The father studied his daughter's face. She was serious, focused, not acting out of childish impulse. He felt unsure. Helping strangers on a plane, especially people sitting in first class, was not simple. There were boundaries. There were social lines people rarely crossed. But the little girl did not see those lines. All she heard was a baby who would not stop crying. And all around her, she felt the growing tension. The plane continued flying steadily through the night sky. Inside, something unexpected was about to begin. The crying continued, echoing through the cabin like a storm that would not pass. The millionaire held his baby tightly, trying everything he could think of. He bounced the baby gently, whispered soothing words, and offered every toy and comfort the flight attendant suggested. But the sound never lessened. In fact, it seemed to grow louder, sharper, more desperate. Passengers were now openly uneasy. Some covered their ears. Others leaned into their screens, trying to drown out the noise. A few whispered complaints, glancing at the flight attendants as if they expected a miracle. The millionaire's wife sat beside him, exhausted. Her hands were shaking slightly as she tried to calm the baby. She had been traveling with him and the baby for weeks, and the constant stress was wearing on her. The child's crying made everything else fade away. She felt helpless. She looked at her husband, hoping he would find a solution. He looked back, equally drained. They both shared a silent understanding. Nothing they had tried worked. The flight attendants moved discreetly, offering support while trying to reassure nearby passengers. They handed out toys, blankets, and small bottles of warm water, but each attempt failed. The baby's cries cut through the cabin with unrelenting intensity. Meanwhile, the single father and his daughter in business class were watching the scene unfold. The father could see the stress building on the millionaire's face and the tension in the cabin. He felt sympathy for them, but was also wary of his daughter's focus. She had been standing quietly near their seats, her eyes following every movement in first class. "Sit down, please," he whispered, but she shook her head. "I want to help," she said softly. He looked at her, uncertain. She was only 8 years old. What could she possibly do? The baby was screaming, and the parents looked desperate. She was a child, and yet her gaze was serious, almost determined. There was no hesitation, no childish playfulness. She was ready to act. The father sighed. "It's not our place. We don't even know them," he whispered, glancing at the cabin crew. "I know," she said, "but he's scared. The baby is scared. I can help." He hesitated, weighing the situation. His daughter had always been empathetic, quick to notice when someone was sad or upset. He remembered the night she had comforted other children at school, the time she had gone out of her way to calm her little cousin when they visited. Maybe, just maybe, she could do something now. He nodded slowly. "All right, but be careful." Her eyes lit up. She nodded and carefully made her way toward the first-class section. Each step was slow, cautious, but her small figure seemed determined. The millionaire glanced up, momentarily startled. He didn't expect a child to approach. A mixture of surprise and concern crossed his face. The little girl paused at the first-class curtain. She looked at the crying baby. The millionaire watched her, unsure what she was about to do. He felt protective instinct rise immediately. Yet, there was something in the girl's calm demeanor that made him hesitate to intervene. She knelt down slightly, keeping her distance but focusing entirely on the baby. She did not speak loudly. She did not wave her hands or make sudden movements. She just looked, and in that quiet look, something seemed to change. The baby's cries did not stop, but they shifted slightly, as if the child was listening and responding to this tiny observer. Passengers in nearby seats watched curiously. The tension in the cabin shifted from irritation to intrigue. No one could understand what was happening, but something different was in the air. The little girl took a deep breath and started to hum softly. At first, it was barely audible, but she hummed a gentle tune, simple and soothing. The melody was not fancy. It was not complicated. It was just a soft, caring sound meant to comfort. She swayed slightly as she hummed, her small hands moving in tiny, gentle motions. The millionaire's baby paused mid-cry. Its fists unclenched slightly. Its eyes focused on the girl. The cries became softer, less sharp. The baby's breathing seemed to slow, as if listening and trying to understand. The millionaire and his wife looked at each other in disbelief. They had tried everything. Doctors, nannies, toys, bottles, rocking. Nothing had worked. And now, this little girl, a stranger, seemed to have an effect they couldn't. The cabin remained quiet, the tension shifting. Some passengers whispered, wondering what she was doing. Others simply watched, holding their breath. The flight attendant smiled quietly, surprised and relieved. The little girl continued. She hummed with care, adding gentle movements, almost like a small dance. The baby's cries became intermittent. Then, finally, the child's eyes drooped and the sobs stopped completely. The baby gazed at the little girl, calm for the first time in nearly an hour. The millionaire stared, speechless. His wife's hand went to her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. She reached for her husband's hand, squeezing it tightly. Neither could find words. The child, a perfect stranger, had done what they could not. The little girl looked up at the parents, smiling softly. She did not speak, just gave a gentle nod, as if to say it was okay. The millionaire's voice trembled as he spoke. How did you? She shrugged, her innocence contrasting with the seriousness of the situation. "I just wanted to help." The millionaire swallowed hard. He looked at his baby, now quiet and calm, and then back at the little girl. He realized something in that moment. Money, power, influence. They had all failed in the face of this simple human connection. And yet, here was a child, acting purely out of empathy and courage, showing him something he had never learned. Passengers around them were still watching quietly. Some smiled, some whispered in amazement. The atmosphere in the cabin had completely shifted. The tension had melted away, replaced by a sense of awe. The flight attendants approached cautiously, unsure whether to intervene. But they saw the peaceful scene and smiled, knowing that the crisis was over. They offered soft words of encouragement to the little girl and thanked her quietly. She simply nodded and took a step back, her mission complete. The father, standing a few rows behind, felt a mix of pride and relief. His daughter had shown courage he could not have imagined. He looked at the millionaire and his wife, who were now recovering from the shock of the situation. Gratitude and disbelief mingled on their faces. The millionaire's wife leaned down to her baby, whispering words of comfort. The child clung to her, calm and secure. The millionaire sat back, closing his eyes briefly. For the first time that evening, he allowed himself to breathe. He looked toward the little girl, who had returned to her father's side. She smiled, small and shy, but full of confidence. He realized that she had not only calmed the baby, but had also reminded him of something essential. Compassion and understanding could be far more powerful than wealth or status. The little girl's father knelt down slightly to speak with her, proud and amazed. "You did it," he whispered. She nodded, her face still serious. "I just want him to be okay," she said. The millionaire, still sitting in disbelief, finally found his voice. He spoke softly, almost reverently. "Thank you? I don't know how to thank you enough." The girl shrugged again. "I didn't do it for thanks." The words lingered in the cabin. No one said anything for a moment, absorbed in the quiet miracle they had just witnessed. The baby cooed softly now, finally relaxed, and the millionaire and his wife held their child closely, overwhelmed by the kindness of a stranger. Passengers began to return to their own distractions. Some resumed their movies or books, but a few still watched, quietly smiling. The mood in the cabin had transformed. What had started as frustration and stress was now relief and quiet wonder. The little girl sat back down next to her father. He put a hand on her shoulder, proud beyond words. She leaned into him, feeling safe and proud of what she had done. He whispered quietly, "You were very brave." She nodded. "I just wanted him to be okay." The millionaire watched, thinking about the journey he and his family had taken. All his wealth, all his influence, could not teach him the lesson that this small girl had just shown. It was not about money, power, or status. It was about empathy, courage, and the willingness to act when someone else needed help. As the plane continued to glide through the night sky, a quiet peace settled over the cabin. The baby slept softly in his mother's arms. Passengers whispered quietly to each other about the miraculous moment they had witnessed. The flight attendants exchanged knowing smiles. And the little girl, sitting with her father, simply smiled, content with having made a difference. The Arab millionaire would never forget this night. He had faced many challenges, many crises in his life, but none like this. He had seen in the eyes and actions of a child a pure, unselfish act that reminded him of what truly mattered. And he knew, deep down, that this moment would change the way he looked at life, at people, and at kindness itself. The night stretched on, and the plane moved steadily toward London. But inside, a remarkable story had already taken flight. A story of empathy, courage, and the quiet power of a child's heart. The plane had settled into a quiet rhythm, but the memory of the baby's earlier cries still hung in the air. Passengers had returned to their distractions, some still glancing toward the first-class section with curiosity and quiet amazement. The little girl sat next to her father, her small hands folded in her lap, but her mind was still with the baby. She could not forget the fear she had sensed, the desperation in those tiny cries. Even from a distance, she had felt it. Something told her the baby needed more than comfort. The child needed understanding, a presence that could reach through the tears. The single father watched her quietly, aware of the intensity in her gaze. He had never seen her focus like this before. She wasn't playing a game or seeking attention. She was studying, listening, preparing to act again. Her empathy was extraordinary for someone so young. Up in first class, the millionaire leaned back in his seat, still holding the baby gently. His wife adjusted the blanket around the child and whispered soft words, hoping to maintain the peace. The baby was quiet now, but his tiny fists occasionally twitched, his lips quivering as if holding back another wave of cries. Every parent on that plane understood the delicate balance. One wrong sound, one wrong movement, and the calm could vanish. The little girl took a deep breath and stood carefully, her father nodding to her once, silently giving permission. She walked slowly down the aisle. Each step was deliberate, careful, almost ceremonial. Passengers in business class glanced up, a mixture of curiosity and mild concern in their expressions. The cabin crew watched from the sidelines, unsure of how to react, but sensing that something important was about to happen. When she reached the curtain separating first class from business class, she paused. Her eyes met the millionaire's. He raised an eyebrow, a silent question. She smiled softly and nodded, a small gesture of reassurance. Then she stepped through. The cabin grew quieter. The passengers leaned forward in their seats. No one moved, no one spoke. Everyone sensed that the ordinary rules of distance and decorum were being suspended by something much stronger, the presence of empathy. The little girl knelt beside the baby. She did not grab toys or make sudden movements. She simply observed. She tilted her head slightly, listening to the rhythm of the baby's breathing and the subtle sound of the cries that remained faint but present. The millionaire watched, holding his breath. His wife's hands rested lightly on the child's shoulders, as if giving silent permission. And then she did something no one expected. She began humming again, softly, quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. The tune was simple, but it carried warmth and reassurance. Her hands moved in gentle, rhythmic patterns, soft and inviting. She didn't speak. She didn't coo or imitate a grown-up. She simply offered presence, attention, and calm. The baby's cries softened immediately. The sharp edges of panic began to fade. Tiny fingers unclenched. Eyes, once wide with fear, blinked slowly, focusing on a small, steady figure in front of him. The sound was no longer urgent. It was a whisper of distress, fading gradually as the little girl continued her quiet performance. Passengers leaned closer, some unable to hide their astonishment. Flight attendants exchanged subtle glances. Everyone sensed that this was no ordinary moment. The child's innate understanding of empathy, the simple power of presence and attention, was performing something extraordinary. The millionaire's voice caught as he whispered, "How?" His words trailed off. He could not explain the miracle unfolding before him. His child, who had refused all efforts at comfort, was now calm, engaged, and soothed by someone half his daughter's age. The little girl continued, humming and moving softly, her focus unwavering. She adjusted her position slightly, placing a gentle hand near the baby's arm, not touching abruptly but offering reassurance through her presence. The baby's cries ceased completely, replaced by soft, curious coos. Tiny eyes followed her movements. His little body relaxed, the tension draining away. Time seemed to stretch. Passengers in first class forgot themselves. They watched quietly, fascinated and moved. Even seasoned travelers who had flown countless times were unable to explain the calm that had overtaken the cabin. A child, barely old enough to understand the complexities of adult life, had done what professionals and money could not. The millionaire and his wife exchanged glances, their eyes filled with gratitude and amazement. Neither could find words to articulate the relief, the astonishment, the quiet joy that filled their hearts. Their baby, once inconsolate, was now calm, soothed by the smallest human connection in a world dominated by wealth, status, and expectations. The little girl hummed a final soft note, gently swaying her hand one last time. The baby, now quiet, cooed softly and reached out a tiny hand toward her. She smiled and gently returned the gesture with her small fingers, a silent connection passing between them. The cabin, which had been tense and strained for over an hour, held its collective breath. Passengers looked at one another, some with tears forming in their eyes, others with wide eyes of disbelief. The flight attendants relaxed their posture, letting the miracle settle over the cabin. The millionaire's voice was barely audible as he finally spoke, still trembling. I don't know how to thank you." The little girl shrugged slightly. "I didn't do it for thanks. I just wanted him to feel safe. Her words, simple and pure, carried more weight than any currency, any status, or any influence the millionaire had ever known. He felt a surge of humility and admiration. Here was a child, young and unassuming, who had demonstrated a depth of empathy and courage that he had rarely encountered in his adult life. Passengers returned to their seats slowly, quietly, giving space to the extraordinary moment. Conversations had ceased. Phones and books had been set aside. Everyone remained silently aware of what had just happened. It was as if the cabin itself had shifted, transformed by the purity of human connection. The little girl stood up and took a step back toward her father. The millionaire and his wife offered quiet smiles, gratitude shining in their eyes. The baby reached for his mother, now calm and content, finally able to rest in the safety of his parents' embrace. Her father knelt slightly to welcome her back, proud beyond words. "You were amazing," he whispered. She nodded, her expression still serious. "I just wanted him to be okay," she replied. The millionaire watched them, feeling a profound shift within himself. Wealth, power, influence, none of it could teach the lessons his child had shown. Empathy, presence, courage, and the willingness to act with kindness had achieved what all his resources could not. The plane continued its journey, engines humming steadily. The night sky stretched out beyond the windows, vast and calm. Inside, a quiet miracle had taken place. A baby's cries had been silenced not by material means, but by the courage and compassion of a small, determined girl. The millionaire leaned back in his seat, finally allowing himself to breathe. His wife adjusted the baby, who now cooed and wriggled contentedly. He looked toward the little girl and her father, understanding that what had just happened was more than a moment of calm. It was a lesson, a story that would stay with him forever. He whispered softly to his wife, almost to himself, "We need to remember this. This is important." She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "It is." Passengers began to settle, some whispering softly about what they had witnessed. Flight attendants moved to the cabin, smiling quietly at the change in atmosphere. A tense journey had been transformed into something extraordinary. The little girl sat with her father, hands folded, her small face filled with quiet pride. She had acted out of kindness, empathy, and a desire to help. Her actions had altered the course of the flight, soothed a frightened child, and reminded everyone present of the extraordinary power of human connection. The millionaire, watching from his seat, felt something shift within himself. He had faced challenges, crises, and difficult decisions in his life, but none of them had taught him as much as this small act of courage and empathy. He understood now that true power was not in wealth or influence, but in the ability to understand, to connect, and to act with kindness. The baby cooed softly, reaching for his mother. She held him close, whispering words of comfort. The millionaire sat back, closing his eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the events of the past hour. The little girl and her father returned to their seats, her small hand resting on her father's arm, proud and calm. The cabin had changed. The atmosphere was no longer tense or stressed. A sense of peace and awe filled the space. Passengers whispered quietly, some with tears in their eyes, others with wide smiles, all witnessing the quiet miracle of empathy and courage. As the plane glided to the night sky, the little girl's actions remained a quiet, powerful reminder. In a world dominated by status, money, and influence, sometimes the smallest acts of courage and compassion could create the greatest impact. And so, the flight continued, carrying passengers toward their destination, but leaving them forever changed by a remarkable moment. A moment where a small child's courage and empathy had transformed fear into calm, tension into peace, and strangers into witnesses of something extraordinary. The calm that settled over the cabin after the little girl's remarkable act was unlike anything the passengers had expected. The baby lay in his mother's arms, content and secure, and the millionaire and his wife exchanged quiet, grateful glances. Even the flight attendants moved with a lighter step, relieved that the crisis had ended. But for the little girl and her father, the journey was far from over. Something unspoken lingered between them and the millionaire's family, a curiosity that demanded explanation. Once the immediate calm returned, the millionaire leaned toward the flight attendant and asked if it was appropriate to invite the little girl and her father to sit with them. The flight attendant nodded with a warm smile, explaining that it was perfectly acceptable. The father hesitated. He had always taught his daughter the importance of boundaries, respect, and caution. He understood the millionaire's desire to show gratitude, but he also valued his family's privacy. Still, the little girl's eyes shone with a quiet insistence. She wanted to understand, to connect, to learn why her actions had had such profound effect. Slowly, the father guided her forward, explaining softly that the millionaire wanted to meet them. The little girl took a deep breath, her small hand gripping her father's. She felt nervous but also curious. Something about the family's reaction, the awe, the gratitude, had touched her deeply. They arrived in first class, and the millionaire greeted them with a mixture of humility and amazement. He extended his hand toward the little girl. "I don't know what to say," he began. "You did something I could never manage, no matter what I tried." The little girl smiled faintly. "I just wanted the baby to be okay," she said softly. Her words were simple, but they carried a depth of meaning the millionaire could feel immediately. He glanced at his wife, whose eyes reflected a mixture of relief and curiosity. Together, they looked at the father and daughter, eager to understand the story behind this extraordinary moment. The father nodded and encouraged his daughter to speak. At first, she hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but the millionaire's kind, patient gaze seemed to invite honesty, and slowly, she began to share. "I had a little brother," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "He was very sick, and he passed away when I was younger. When he was in the hospital, I spent many nights with him, singing to him, keeping him calm, just being there. I learned how to listen to babies, how to understand what they need when they can't tell anyone with words." The millionaire's eyes widened. He had faced many challenges, many unexpected moments in life, but this story touched him deeply. He understood, perhaps for the first time, the true meaning of experience born from care and love rather than wealth or status. Her father added softly, "She learned patience, empathy, and courage at a very young age. We never forced it, but she wanted to help. She wanted to make a difference." The millionaire and his wife were silent for a moment, absorbing the story. Their baby, now calm and curious, reached for the little girl, who gently smiled back. It was a quiet, unspoken connection that bridged the gap between strangers, showing the power of empathy in its purest form. "Your daughter is extraordinary," the millionaire said finally, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "I've never seen anything like this. I don't think I could ever teach anyone to do what she just did." The father smiled modestly, shaking his head. "It wasn't about teaching," he said. "She just felt what needed to be done." The little girl nodded, looking down at her hands. "I just wanted him to feel safe," she whispered. The millionaire leaned back, reflecting on what he had witnessed. Money had given him many things, but this was something that money could never buy. He had power, influence, and luxury, but empathy, the kind that could calm a terrified baby, was something he had never mastered. He realized now that he had been privileged in every way except in understanding the depth of human connection. His wife reached over, gently holding his hand. "We've been so focused on everything else," she said quietly. "We forgot how powerful simple kindness can be." The little girl's father nodded. "It's something we all learn from experience, sometimes in the hardest ways." She learned it from love and loss, from caring when it mattered most. The millionaire's face softened. He looked at his child, then back at the little girl. A sense of humility washed over him. He had faced challenges and obstacles in life, but he had never experienced a lesson as profound as this one. It wasn't about influence or authority. It was about heart, attention, and understanding. "You've taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn," he said. "Even with everything I have, I could not do what you just did. You've shown me the power of empathy in its purest form." The little girl looked up, her eyes shining. "I didn't do it for praise," she said softly. "I did it because he was scared and needed help. I wanted to be there for him." Her words resonated with everyone present. The millionaire and his wife felt gratitude not just for the act, but for the lesson embedded in it. The father watched proudly, knowing that his daughter's compassion had bridged a gap that status and wealth could not reach. The passengers who had witnessed a moment earlier felt a quiet awe, silently recognizing that something extraordinary had occurred. The flight continued, the night sky stretching endlessly outside the windows. The plane glided smoothly, engines humming a steady rhythm. Inside, a different kind of journey was taking place, a journey of understanding, connection, and the revelation that true power and influence were not measured in money or status, but in the ability to reach out with care and compassion. The millionaire and his wife invited the little girl and her father to join them for a small conversation, asking gently about their lives, their experiences, and how she had developed such remarkable sensitivity at such a young age. They spoke quietly, sharing stories of childhood, empathy, and the lessons learned through loss and care. The little girl explained that she had spent countless nights at her brother's side, learning the subtle ways to comfort someone who could not speak their needs. She learned how to listen without words, how to be patient, how to offer presence as a form of care. These were lessons born not from instruction, but from love. The millionaire listened, moved by the depth of her experiences. His own life had been filled with challenges and responsibilities, but he realized that he had never truly understood the kind of patience and empathy this young girl had developed. It was a humbling realization. His wife reached over, adjusting the baby in her arms, who now seemed content and curious. "We've been so focused on what we can do with our resources," she said quietly. "We forgot about the simplest, most powerful tools we have, our hearts and our attention." The little girl smiled faintly, acknowledging the truth in her words. "It's not about resources," she said softly. "It's about noticing when someone needs you and choosing to act." The millionaire nodded slowly, absorbing the wisdom in her statement. He realized that the simple truth applied not only to raising a child, but to every aspect of life. Influence, power, and wealth could open doors, but they could never replace the human connection that made a real difference. As the plane continued its journey, the atmosphere in the cabin remained transformed. What had started as a stressful, tense situation had become a profound moment of understanding and connection. The passengers who had witnessed the events earlier carried a quiet awe, feeling the impact of a simple act of empathy performed by a small, determined girl. The millionaire and his wife reflected on the events, recognizing the humility and gratitude that this young girl had inspired. They realized that life's most valuable lessons often came from the smallest, most unexpected sources. The baby's cries had been silenced not by wealth or status, but by compassion, presence, and courage. The father watched his daughter with pride. He understood that she had acted not for recognition, not for reward, but because she truly cared. Her actions had bridged a gap that no wealth or influence could cross, and in doing so, had changed the lives of everyone in that cabin. The little girl leaned against her father's arm, quietly content. She had acted out of kindness, empathy, and courage. Her actions had not only calmed the frightened baby, but it also revealed a truth that the millionaire and his wife would carry with them forever. The greatest power in the world is the ability to connect, to understand, and to act with compassion. The plane moved steadily through the night, carrying passengers toward their destination. Yet, inside, a remarkable story had unfolded. A story of empathy, courage, and the quiet power of a child's heart, leaving an impression that would last far longer than the flight itself. The plane continued gliding through the night sky, carrying passengers toward their destination, but the events of the past hours lingered in everyone's minds. The little girl had returned to her seat next to her father, but the impact of her actions was still felt in first class, where the millionaire and his wife sat holding their baby. The baby, now peaceful, occasionally reached out to touch his mother's face, cooing softly. The millionaire watched, still in disbelief at what had happened. After a few minutes of quiet reflection, the millionaire leaned toward his wife. "We need to do something," he whispered. "We cannot let this go unnoticed. She has given us something we can never repay in words." His wife nodded. "I know, but we have to be careful. We don't want to overwhelm them." The father of the little girl noticed the millionaire's gaze and the way he seemed to be summoning courage. He understood the unspoken thought, gratitude, and perhaps a desire to help in a meaningful way. Yet he also felt the weight of protecting his daughter, ensuring that no offer would compromise her or their family's dignity. Finally, the millionaire called softly, "Excuse me, may we speak with you for a moment?" The father and daughter approached cautiously. The little girl's hand gripped her father's, sensing that something important was about to unfold. The millionaire extended both hands warmly. "I don't know how to express my gratitude," he said. "What you did, what your daughter did, it was beyond anything I have ever experienced. I want to offer support, something meaningful for her future. Education, opportunities, anything she may need." The father hesitated, pride and caution warring with the offer. Money could make life easier, but it also came with expectations and hidden pressures. He looked at his daughter, her small face filled with curiosity and confidence, and understood that the decision could impact her life in a profound way. "I appreciate your offer," he said carefully, "but we must consider what is right for her, not just what is convenient for anyone else." The millionaire nodded respectfully. "I understand completely. I am not asking for anything in return. I simply want to give it a chance to grow, to learn, and to reach her potential. I see qualities in her that are rare in this world. Courage, empathy, understanding, qualities that money cannot buy, but that deserve to be nurtured." The little girl looked up at her father. Her eyes sparkled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She understood the opportunity before her, but she also knew that accepting it would mark a turning point in her life. Her father took a deep breath. "If we accept, it must be on our terms," he said. "No pressure, no expectations, just a genuine offer to support her growth. That is the only way it would be right." The millionaire smiled, relief and respect shining in his eyes. "Absolutely. No conditions, no strings attached. Only support, guidance, and the chance to pursue what she wants in life." The little girl's face lit up. She looked at the baby, who now smiled at her as if in recognition, and then at the millionaire and his wife. "Thank you," she whispered. "I will do my best, I promise." The millionaire nodded solemnly. "I know you will." As the conversation ended, the father guided his daughter back to their seats. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted once again, this time from awe to quiet resolution. Passengers who had witnessed the interaction earlier felt a sense of satisfaction, understanding that something truly significant had taken place. The flight continued without incident, the engines humming steadily, the night sky vast and calm outside. But inside, a new chapter had begun for the little girl. She had acted with courage and empathy, and now her actions were being recognized in a way that could shape her future. She understood the responsibility, but she also felt the hope and possibility that came with it. The millionaire sat back, reflecting on the events. He realized that his life had been changed in subtle but profound ways. He had seen firsthand that wealth and power were not the ultimate measures of a person's impact. True influence, he understood now, came from the ability to connect with others, to act with compassion, and to recognize potential in those who may seem small or overlooked. His wife rested her head against his shoulder, whispering, "We've been given a gift tonight, not just for the baby, but for ourselves." He nodded. "Yes, and it's a lesson I will carry forever." The little girl leaned against her father, exhausted but content. She had faced a situation that demanded courage and empathy, and she had risen to the occasion. Now, she understood that her actions had consequences beyond the immediate moment, shaping lives and creating opportunities she had never imagined. The father held her close, proud and protective. "You did something incredible tonight," he whispered. "Not just for the baby, but for everyone who witnessed it. You've changed lives." She nodded, her eyes heavy with sleep, but shining with quiet pride. "I just wanted him to feel safe," she said softly. The millionaire looked at the two of them, understanding that what had occurred was a reminder of what truly mattered in life: empathy, courage, and a willingness to act when someone needed help. He had learned a lesson that no wealth could provide, a lesson that would stay with him forever. As the plane descended toward London, the passengers prepared for landing, the engines humming steadily. The night sky stretched endlessly, and inside, a remarkable story had been written. A baby's cries had been silenced, a young girl's courage had been recognized, and a millionaire had learned a profound truth about human connection and compassion. When the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, the cabin erupted in quiet relief. Passengers gathered their belongings, sharing whispers and smiles, carrying with them the memory of the extraordinary events that had taken place. The little girl held her father's hand, her heart full of pride and hope for the future. The millionaire and his wife collected their belongings, still holding their baby. They approached the father and daughter one last time before disembarking. "Thank you," the millionaire said, his voice sincere and steady. "You've given us more than you can imagine. I hope this is the beginning of a wonderful journey for her." The father nodded, understanding the weight of the words. "It will be, if we guide it carefully and honor what she's already shown." The little girl smiled softly, feeling a sense of calm and accomplishment. She had acted with empathy and courage, and now her actions had opened doors she had never known existed. The experience had changed not only the lives of the baby and his family, but also her own, instilling confidence, pride, and a deeper understanding of the power of compassion. As they left the airport, the city lights stretching before them, the father and daughter knew that this was a night they would never forget. A small act of courage had created ripples far beyond the moment, touching lives, teaching lessons, and shaping futures in ways that would endure long after the flight had ended. The millionaire watched them walk away, holding his baby close. He had learned a lesson he would carry forever. The greatest gift one can receive is not wealth or power, but the reminder that empathy, courage, and the willingness to act for others can change the world, one small act at a time. And for the little girl, this was just the beginning of a journey shaped by kindness, bravery, and the quiet strength that comes from a heart willing to help when it matters most.